been southbound, I've been hellbound, riding on the midnight train. Going too fast now, think I'll slow down, standing in the pouring rain.
What's going on, guys? Tristan and Tony back with another episode of the One Hell of a Life Outdoor Podcast. And today we got Dr. Mike Chamberlain on the podcast to talk about all kinds of awesome turkey knowledge. You guys are probably familiar with his work. He's at UGA and Wild Turkey Lab and all that good stuff. Mike, thank you for taking the time to talk with us tonight.
Absolutely. Not a problem.
Yeah, no, I mean, Mike, you would do it best by, if you could just introduce people to who you are and a little bit of your background, if you don't mind.
Yeah, excuse me. So I'm a faculty member at the University of Georgia. I'm a wildlife researcher. I've been studying all kinds of critters for 30 years, but wild turkeys are definitely what I'm best known for. I've been doing applied field research on turkeys for the last, 32 years.
Nice. Wow. I can't even, just my limited interaction with turkeys has been so small. So I can only just imagine the wealth of knowledge you got on that. I mean, not only from just from a scientific side, but also from just an outdoorsman as well.
Yeah, I started out as a turkey hunter long before I was a turkey scientist, that's for sure.
We've talked to, I don't know if you've heard of Dr. Bradley Cohen up there in
Oh, yeah.
Tennessee. We've had him on the podcast, and, one of the things he always points out, he's like, because he's a hunter as well, too, of course, and he's like, it's one of those double-edged swords because, this is the time of year where it's during duck season for him, you got to get this crucial data, but like he's also a hunter, and it kind of is one of those things where you do what you love and then you don't spend as much time hunting. Is it kind of like that for you this time of year, or do you get to hunt a lot?
I get out and hunt. I force myself to not, I work hard, of course, and I burn the candle at both ends during the spring so that I can take some time to hunt.
Well, what I was going to tell everybody tonight is that, you know what? There's one person that's finally got these birds figured out, right?
Not me. Not me.
Yes, sir. No, that just goes to show you how tricky those little boogers are, with all the knowledge that you have, like I said, from the scientific side and just habitat and just things that I think a lot of us hunters just go out and we're trying to harvest an animal, but it's whenever we're not successful that we start looking at the details, like, oh, maybe I should be looking around for what they're scratching around and eating, or, oh, that's a hen track, not a gobbler track, or whatever it is, So.
Yeah. Well, I can tell you that no matter how much and how gifted a caller you are, et cetera, you can still get your tail kicked. I had to laugh earlier this week. I spent 2 days with probably two of the best turkey hunters that's ever walked this planet. One is a multiple national champion caller, and we got our tails handed to us for 2 days, and had good opportunities and just couldn't close the deal. And sometimes turkeys are just turkeys, and you lose, and that's why it's so fun.
Yeah.
It's always amazing to me. You'll not amazing, but it's surprising how many people that are really avid turkey hunters are like, oh man, I haven't killed a turkey in 3 or 4 years, and just puts into perspective, how hard it is to connect with them sometimes, especially if you're a weekend warrior type person.
Yes, for sure. It's easy to get your butts kicked.
Were you guys hunting in Georgia?
No, we were next door in Alabama, and we had birds were acting like birds, but man, we had some bad luck, and it just didn't work out the way you would hope. But that's turkey hunting. That's the way it goes.
Mm-hmm. Sure. One thing I didn't realize, and this is just not knowing a lot about turkey behavior, but it kind of makes sense. So I was listening to a guy talk about turkey hunting in North Georgia recently, and he was saying the birds here just haven't really kind of kicked off what they do with the territorialness and the strutting and all that turkey the rut of the turkey season, if you could call it that. But and I started noticing, I drive a lot for work, and I was driving all over North Georgia the last week, and I started seeing a lot of like what he was talking about, like fields with, there'd be 3 or 4 gobblers, and like there might be 8 or 10 hens or whatever. And I guess, and you can go into this more, please, Mike, but I guess this time of year when you see that, that's not necessarily a good sign for their for the activity as far as them being responsive to calling and stuff yet, or.
Well, it makes it tough, but it's expected. So what birds are doing right now is the hens are just starting to get into their laying sequence. First week of April into the second week of April, and here in Georgia, that's when they start really getting active in laying, and that's about a 2-week process. So during that time and just before that time, it can be tough because just before laying starts, you've got these groups of hens these are breeding groups, or they're social, they know each other, and there may be 2 or 3 or 4 toms hanging around with them. But those hens are spending all day together, and the toms know it, so they just kind of hang around with them, and that's tough. You're trying to get birds to leave hens can be a real challenge, but over the next week or so, you're going to start seeing laying activity really increase, and when that happens, that's when the hens start kind of leaving and spending a couple hours away from those toms, and when that starts happening, you can get a little bit of success at that point.
A little bit easier to trick them.
For sure.
Now are you a big fan, like when it comes to strategy wise, are you a big fan of, the debate on using decoys or not using decoys? Do you like to basically just call and not give them something to look at, or are you a fan of decoys?
It really just depends on the situation. I'm not, I won't even get into the whole debate, the purist versus the everyone else. I don't do that. I don't, it's not worth arguing about, but
Sure.
Sometimes I will use a decoy. I find down here, particularly in the.
What's going on, guys? If you're planning a spring break visit to the Florida Panhandle, down there by the Gulf of America, then make sure you book a charter with Williamson Outfitters. From March to May, Williamson Outfitters offers amazing inshore fishing, awesome flounder gigging, and epic hog hunting with dogs. They also have an incredible hunting lodge in East Point, Florida that's available. Spots fill up fast, so book today. Call or text 850-251-8650 or visit floridaducks.com. Mention you heard about them on this podcast and get 10% off.
Densely forested areas, it's often not even worth the hassle of carrying them around. So a lot of times I don't worry about decoys per se. I tend to focus more on trying to be where the birds want to go. And I scout a lot, and I try to, understand what the birds on the properties I'm hunting are going to do, what they've been doing. And I try to become part of their day. So it's a lot, in my experience, it's a lot easier to call a bird to a place he already wants to be than trying to call him to a spot he wasn't planning to go. So I try to do a lot of homework, if you will, and try to understand what the birds are doing. And then again, sometimes I'll use a decoy, sometimes I won't. I tend to use decoys a little bit more out west when I go out west each year, just because they're visible and the environment out there is so fundamentally different than it is here.
Sure. Yeah. Out there, I would imagine they can, be like, oh, I see 500 yards over there, and I hear them calling, but I don't see anything, so I'm not going to go over there. Versus here, they kind of have to go check it out if they're, all fired up.
Yeah. Dealing with forest is definitely a lot different than going out in some of the, more open areas out west.
I hear, from what I've heard about hunting, like the Kansas, the out west kind of states, like, I guess there's a ton of turkeys out there. What's hunting like out there compared to, and that's Merriam's out there? Is that what they're hunting?
It really depends on where you're at. If you're in Kansas, you're you're hunting Rios in the western part of the state and Easterns in the far eastern part of the state. It really just depends on the situation. I mean, as you tend to go, up into Nebraska and the Dakotas, you get into a situation where you've got really isolated pockets of birds. Birds are not uniform like they kind of are down here, where you have pockets of turkeys here, but out there you'll have broad areas that's not turkey habitat. And so you don't have birds for miles, and then suddenly you have a cluster of birds. So it is quite a bit different.
Yeah, they're just more concentrated, I guess.
Yeah, and I mean, there's not birds, quote unquote, everywhere. I mean, you when you get along rivers and creeks and lowland hardwood areas, you'll find turkeys. But as you move out west, roost sites become limited in many areas, and that's going to dictate where you have birds.
Gotcha.
This is just, Tristan, we haven't talked about this. You probably haven't heard me talk about this in a long time, but I wanted to bounce this off of you and see if you've ever seen this before, Mike. And that's, I was up in Illinois, up along the Mississippi River on a WMA. And it's a big WMA, and I was hunting there during the winter. In Illinois, you can shoot turkeys, with your bow during bow season in the fall. And usually when you're seeing them, especially later in the winter, you're getting some big groups of turkeys come through. Like 50, 60. And it's something that when you hear the forest crumble like that, it's just like, when you first hear it, you're like, oh, here comes that buck chasing that doe, and then you're like, oh man. And I was lucky enough. I've only shot one turkey, and it was with my bow, and it was a bearded hen, which I guess was native to up there, is what one of the game wardens had told me. They
are. Yep.
Yeah. But here's the peculiar thing that I found. I was along. I don't know if you're familiar with McKee Creek up in that area, but it's a big. I think some people would call it a small river. Like, the Cache River in Arkansas, Tristan, it's like that. But it's a creek. I mean, you can bass fish out of it and everything. And along this thing, I find this flat in this bottom. And when me and my buddy walk up on it, everything is dead on the forest floor. Everything. And it's just covered in turkey droppings. I mean, everything was dead. In this big circle, there's a big cottonwood tree, probably about, I don't know. I mean, when I put my arms all the way around it, I still had another 4 or 5 feet. Wow. I mean, it was giant. And the whole everything under the canopy where these turkeys were roosting in that tree over years and years and years, apparently, is what the one of the park rangers told me. He goes, "Oh, I know exactly what you're talking about." He goes, "That's like a legendary spot." I go, "What?" He goes, "They've been roosting there for like 100 years." And I go, well, that tree's like probably 600 years old. I don't know. But it was so cool because I'd never seen something. I mean, I didn't even hunt turkeys really back then, but to see something like that, I was like, dude, what is this? Have you ever seen anything like that where it's just a traditional roosting spot where they're not disturbed,
Yes, I have. I mean, when you start getting out west, those cottonwoods they're critical where they occur, and almost all turkey roost in areas, in some areas they're going to roost in cottonwoods. And so literally there'll be generation after generation of turkeys that roost in that same tree or in the same clump of trees. And I have seen that, where you get under it and there's just piles of droppings. It's pretty wild to see it.
It is.
Holy cow.
It is. Next time we're up there, Tristan, we're planning on going up there doing some bow hunting this year for deer. But we get up there, I'll take you and show you where that is. And I hope it's still there. I mean, it's been probably 7 or 8 years since I've been there in that exact spot. But it's something to see. I mean, it's just it's so odd, But no, I didn't mean to get sideways on that. But one of the things before we drilled too much, because I got some really. I got a lot of turkey questions. All right. I love, I really think that I wanted to be in science, but I just didn't pursue it strong enough, I didn't feel like my brain was geared for that. But
I understand.
I love it now. Like the older I get, just like history, I love history more the older I get. I love the science behind animals. You know how I am with ducks, Tristan. I'm psychotic. They call me HD duck hunter because I'm ex-military and I'm like so OCD about like I have these mallards that live around here all year long, and I get to see them go through their plumage change and have their babies, and I just won't shut up about them. And everybody's like, "Dude, will you just shut up?" You know. And but when it comes to turkeys, you know, I definitely want to drill down on some of that stuff. But what does it look like for you professionally, just so people know? Because here's the deal. I mean, if I was a young person and I'm wanting to pursue a career, I would think that, and I wasn't smart enough to do this when I was younger, but you know, you follow people that you want to learn from. And I know for a fact that students will pick universities based on who the professors are and that kind of thing. What does a day in the life of Dr. Mike look like, you know, at the University of Georgia?
Gosh.
If you can go into that, I don't want to.
Yeah. I mean, most days it really depends on the time of the year. I mean, this time of year, I'm up, you know, like this morning, I was up at 5, I couldn't sleep. Mind was racing, trying to, you know, thinking through research projects that are ongoing and questions that are in my head, and trying to get the to-do list, you know, for the day started, and on the road a lot. So every day is quite a bit different. I will tell you, you know, I got into this field to be outside, and I spend some time outside, particularly during the spring when I'm hunting. But most of my actual job is sitting behind a desk, dealing with emails and administrative things, budgets, making sure my field projects are running smoothly, dealing with graduate students and field technicians and salary issues and payroll issues. And I'm kind of a manager in a lot of ways. I mean, I hire people that do the field research for me, as you know, they're working with me, and I kind of guide the ship, and then I'll turn them loose and get out of their way and let them do their job, because I have study sites all over the country, and there's people stationed at each one of those, and they're catching birds in the winter and tracking birds in the spring and summer and taking classes in the fall. So it's, you know, I'm kind of herding cats a lot of the year. And I write a lot. I communicate a lot. I do a lot of social media work. I do a lot of podcasts. I do a lot of presentations. I travel a lot to speak to groups, and so it's a busy life. Well,
sure. that's not counting your dedication to NWTF, you know, as well. I mean, that in itself is got to be just another extension arm of trying to fit something into your day, right?
Yeah, I mean, you know, NWTF endowed my position at the University of Georgia, which what that means is that I'm the National Wild Turkey Federation Distinguished Professor, and what that means is there's a permanent endowment that provides support money for me to do research, and that's in perpetuity. And more importantly, when I retire, the university they have to replace me with someone that is going to do applied research on turkeys. So
isn't that cool?
Yeah, it's a permanent legacy, if you will, and it's the first endowed position ever that is focused on turkeys. So yeah, I do have a close working relationship with NWTF, and I've worked on that endowment for a long time, and I was tickled to see it come to fruition.
Wow. You know,
that's really cool.
Yeah, that is super cool. Because, you know, we talk about conservation all the time, you know, whoever we have on the podcast, whatever species we're talking about, you know, from fish to elk or whatever it is, you know, and, you know, that's one of the coolest things about being an outdoorsman, when you spend your money, you know that a certain portion of that is going to help conservation, you know, and, you know, I always, and I hate to compare it this way, but, you know, there's always folks, you know, we're Christians here, and, you know, there's folks, we go to church, and you have a friend of yours that goes, man, you give church your money? You'd be like, yep. And they're like, I ain't giving them none of my money. That's all they're trying to do is take your money. And I go, that's kind of how they survive. You
Right,
know,
that's right.
You know, I mean, and it's the same thing with anything really. And I always compare to donating to conservation is just like that. Like if you don't know anything about whatever it is, of course you don't want to put any money towards it. You know what I mean?
Sure.
But it's those of us that connect with that and understand the importance of it, is what really just sucks you in. You know what I mean? It makes you, there's a sense of loyalty to it. And so thank you for all your dedication. And really, I mean, your act of professionalism raised the bar that high for that to happen there. And that's just a cool thing that's going to go on and on and on.
Yep, I agree. And I appreciate the kind words.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Go ahead, Tristan.
I was going to ask, while we're kind of on this topic, so the wild turkey.
It's in the teens that morning, and maybe you're chasing ducks or geese. But now it's September, and it's 85 degrees, and you're hunting early teal or geese. As a waterfowler, you need dependable weather protection that will not break the bank. Founded in 1996, Frog Togs is not only the leader in breathable wader technology, but a company you can depend on to keep you warm and dry, head to toe, no matter your hunting environment. Stay bone dry by using discount code ZD315 for 15% off not only your first purchase, like most discount codes, but how about every single purchase you make from now until December 31st, 2024?
DNA deal. Could you kind of go into what the initiative or goals are to find with the wild turkey DNA stuff and having hunters submit submit whatever they submit from the turkey to you guys?
Yep. Yeah. So Wild Turkey DNA kind of follows on the heels. If you're familiar with Ducks Unlimited's Duck DNA program.
Yeah.
Yep.
Very cool.
Yeah. So I collaborate with Dr. Phil Lavretsky at the University of Texas, El Paso on some of my other turkey genetics work, and Phil is involved in duck DNA, and so literally back around the end of January, I started getting some ideas about trying to understand two things. One would be the origin of these odd colored birds that you see pop up on social media every year that are, we don't know what those birds are in some cases. Are they color phases of wild turkeys? Are they crosses between wild birds and domestic type birds, or something in between? And so that's something I've been interested in since I was literally a brand new grad student. And then the other is I've always wanted to do a broad kind of range-wide genetic assessment. Something like that has only been done once, and it was really focused on kind of pockets, areas, trying to figure out the subspecies delineations and whether they were genetically different. And I have a different idea. So basically I ended up on the phone with Phil on Super Bowl Sunday, and what had gotten me kind of pushing a little bit was I was in a kind of a back and forth with a few hunters who had shot some birds last year and thought they were something, and I looked at them and thought they were something else, and so I ended up on the phone with Phil, and I said, let me ask you a question. I said, if I got you a tissue sample from a turkey, could you tell me if it's a wild turkey, a domestic turkey, or something in between? And he said, well, of course I can. And I said, okay. And so we finished our conversation and started texting back and forth. And literally a few weeks later, we launched Wild Turkey DNA, which is a collaborative project between the Wild Turkey Lab that I run, NWTF, Ducks Unlimited, UTEP, and the Low Country Game Bird Foundation, which is headquartered in South Carolina. It's a foundation that's focused on conservation of game birds. And so what we're doing is this first year we're focusing on birds with odd plumage. So we're asking hunters, if you kill a turkey that doesn't look like the average turkey, go to wildturkeydna.com and you can request a kit. And what that's going to do is it's going to generate an email. You'll be asked to upload a picture of your bird. That picture will come to me. I'll look at it and then determine, if this is a bird we want to sample or not. Meanwhile, the hunters are asked, as soon as they make that initial contact, to remove the end of the tongue, just like duck DNA, to remove the end of the tongue and throw it in the freezer. And if we select the person to sample the bird, we ship out a little kit, and postage is paid. It shows up at the hunter's home. It's got a little vial in it. You take that frozen piece of tongue, you drop it in the vial, and there's a postage paid box, and you drop it in the mail, and it goes to UTEP, and we start figuring out what it is. So that's his first year. Next year we'll expand the project to allow hunters from all over the species range to register before the season to receive kits. And what we're hoping to do there is to literally get samples from all 49 states where turkeys occur.
Wow.
And do a very broad scale genetic analysis of the species.
Wow, that's really interesting. And I think one thing that, I don't know, might be kind of a dumb question, but that prompts me to think about, like, in a state like Florida, and you might already know this, Mike, but is there any crossover between, you mentioned a domestic turkey and a wild turkey, but in a state like Florida where there's Easterns and Osceolas, I mean, has there ever been a hybrid between the two?
Well, actually, genetically, the previous study that I mentioned that was done back around 2000, it concluded that genetically Easterns and Osceolas were the same. They were not differentiated from one another, and that kind of makes sense if you think about it, because there's nothing really separating birds from, say, the northern part of Florida from the southern part of Florida. There's nothing like a big river or an ocean or a desert or mountain ranges or anything that would separate the birds and allow them to genetically diverge, like you'd see with Easterns and Merriams or Easterns and Goulds. Or so that work suggested that at least genetically they're the same bird. Now, obviously, morphologically, if you look at Osceolas, they look different. Their wings are darker. They're smaller. Their legs appear longer, and I think partially because their bodies are smaller, and so they look a little lankier. And so, yeah, that's part of what we want to look at is, are they genetically different? And if they are, okay. And if they're not, that's fine. Basically in a lot of ways, you expect birds as they get farther south to get smaller. That's kind of called Bergman's rule. As you get closer to the equator, animals get smaller and smaller and smaller. So that's not unexpected that you see that.
Huh.
Now, is that similar to, like, with whitetails? You look at a whitetail from Illinois, and it just, the nose and the way the antlers are looks so much different than like a whitetail in Texas. And then obviously, like, the deer in Florida look different. Is it kind of the same thing with whitetails, how like genetically they're all still whitetails, but just for whatever reason, wherever they're at, they are slightly different?
Well, they get smaller as they go further south. And that, if correct me if I'm wrong, Mike, but there's a, I don't know if it's Darwin or whatever that said that, that, mammals get bigger further north.
That's right.
Yeah,
Yep.
and fish do just the opposite. I feel like when I was fishing in Illinois compared to Florida, but I don't know that for sure. But there's, I mean, is that just a genetic thing, just because of the harshness of the winters and the seasonal changes and habitat and all that stuff that is just that's developed that way?
Well, I mean, as you get, if you think about it from the standpoint of energy consumption and heat dissipation and dealing with cold weather, it makes sense to be bigger as you go farther north versus dealing with incredible heat, humidity, water. It doesn't make sense to be big and fat in the deep south.
Sure.
So and we don't have climatic extremes like you would see up, as you go farther north. So for a whitetail, for instance, they don't deal with the extreme and harsh environments down here that they would, in northern Illinois or Saskatchewan, where you see, enormous body sizes and really, really heavy weights that you just don't see in the South.
Sure. Do you want coffee that doesn't suck? Get the Duck. Dirty Duck coffee is made specifically for the waterfowl enthusiast. Enjoy flavors like Morning Wood, Dark Dynasty, Cinnamon Teal Snickerdoodle, and First Flight to unlock the flavor that you'll enjoy in the blind for years to come. Our friends at Dirty Duck Coffee Company are now offering all Zero Duck 30 followers a 15% discount when you use code ZeroDuck15 on your next order. One of the things that, since we're kind of along the subject with the research you guys are doing with the DNA and everything, is genetic mutation. Every species has it. Even, I guess you could say, humans have it. And so many times it's a color thing. I would guess that a multi-bearded turkey is a genetic mutation. A turkey with 3 legs, I'm sure, has happened, or 3 wings. I mean, things like that. Maybe a double-headed turkey. I'm not sure, but can you talk about like what causes a genetic mutation? I mean, I guess it has to do with the cells, but I just want to kind of understand that from a scientific level.
Yeah, I mean, you're just dealing with situations where you catch lightning in a bottle, and recessive genetic traits are expressed in animals. Like in turkeys. In fact, weird looking light colored plumage is white or cream, or those are recessive traits that often don't get expressed. You have to catch lightning in a bottle for 2 wild birds to express some of these traits. Multi-beards and multi-spurs and things like that we think are genetically linked. There hasn't been work actually definitively showing that, to my knowledge. But the fact that you see some of the issues you see in turkeys persist in local areas suggest that they are genetic. Like you tend to see, for instance, bearded hens. It's very common to see, if you see bearded hens in areas, you see more than one. I know properties and areas that it's very common to shoot toms with multiple beards, but that's not, you don't see that often. But I know of places where guys kill multi-bearded birds almost every year.
Wow.
Multi-spurs, that's much more rare. And I'm not aware of any evidence showing that's clustered into certain parts of the landscape. But, you may have seen this, but turkeys that have odd plumage in their tail, so like the center 2 tail feathers may have some white barring in it that almost kind of looks like wing barring. That's genetic, and it's real common. You see it pop up. One of the places I hunt in South Dakota, almost every other turkey that I kill in that particular part of the county looks like that. So, I mean, it has to be a genetic issue.
Sure. Well, I was like testing Google AI, and I was just like, "What is the most rarest wild turkey?" And it said the red-faced turkey. What do you think about that answer?
The red phase, is that what it said?
Yes, sir.
Yeah, I mean, we think that we think there's actually a red phase wild turkey. Historically, if you go back and read old text, it would say that there were red phase, there were smoke phase, there were melanistic turkeys, which would be solid black, and then there were leucistic turkeys, which would be white. I will have to admit, I've always been skeptical of that because those recessive traits, it would seem that nature would penalize those birds, but interestingly enough, that was part of what bore out the start of wild turkey DNA. Is okay, let's try to figure out what these birds are. I mean, are they actually wild turkeys? And if they are, what do they look like?
Right.
And so that's one thing we're looking at. The red, you actually see pretty commonly. You see red hues in wild turkeys. You see what I think are probably wild birds that have red all over their wings, on their tails. We've caught birds here in Georgia that we've caught several. It's called erythristic, which is the red phase, that are almost solid red, and you see that in other game birds. You see it in grouse, and so that to me makes sense that you would, if you're seeing that same color variation in other game birds, that it would make sense that it would be natural in wild turkeys.
Sure.
What you don't see in other game birds, you don't see like smoke phase pheasants, or smoke phase grouse, or you don't see that. So that's what leads me to want to understand the origin of these wild birds, these wild turkeys that have these odd plumage patterns.
That's interesting, man. I don't know this, so I'm asking this so I can educate myself. And this I don't know specifically about turkeys, and I'm slapping myself because I'm just sitting there going, how have I not researched this? What I'm sure turkeys, along with all other big game, during the commercial market times, back in the early 1900s and stuff, where did turkeys go, and where have they came since? I guarantee, I just have to know that there was a gigantic impact during that time, and maybe very close to extinct or something. I don't know. What's the history behind that?
Well, turkeys, were distributed all over parts of North America, and then were extirpated, except in pockets. There were some areas that turkeys persisted in, extremely rugged areas, densely forested areas that were swampy and wet. You had areas like, Francis Marion National Forest and some of the other parts of the Southeast where turkeys just kind of hung on, they persisted. And then, those were the source populations that were used to restore the species. So you basically had, turkeys from certain parts of the continent that were picked up and moved, and they were repeatedly moved. So, you had to go back to some of these sources multiple times because there weren't but so many of those sources. So,
sure.
And that's another question we want to get at is, are given that history, are some of the source populations that were used doing better than others? In other words, if you go into a population now and you sample it genetically, you can identify the source of those birds. You can compare them to the populations they came from, and you can see if they're persisting. In other words, let's just say you here near my house, let's say turkeys came from 5 different places decades ago.
Mm-hmm.
And now you go and you test birds here and you discover that all of the birds are traced back to 3 sources. Well, then that means that 2 of those sources are gone. And so what I want to try to understand is, okay, well, which sources are gone? And more importantly, which sources have persisted? Because the ones that have persisted, to me, it's logical they're more fit, right? They're better adapted to this area. So that's something I really am keen on understanding.
One thing I'm interested in, Mike, is you hear like the glory days of when turkeys kind of like hit that peak in like the 90s, I think it was. And I think we had the turkey biologist from the state on, Emily Rushton, to talk about some of this. And she was saying that I think, or maybe I'd seen that the average hatch was like 3 to 4, offspring in the spring. And now it's to the point where it's like 1.5 or 1.7. And I guess my question is, with all of there just seems like to be this awareness in the turkey hunting community now about like predator management and burn-in areas and things like that. Are you encouraged on what you're seeing as far as just like your outlook of the species rebounding? Because I've also heard like they need to have like two or more offspring make it to have a sustainable population long term.
Yeah, I mean, we have seen, over the last particularly 10 years, pretty dismal reproduction. What you're referencing is our poult per hen ratios, which would just be the ratio of poults or young turkeys observed per adult in the summer. And you generally, we've kind of thought that 2 poults per hen was necessary to kind of maintain populations, and anything below that wasn't positive. And in Georgia, we've gone through a number of years until last year, where we were well below 2 poults per hen. Last year, we saw a nice uptick. And so, yeah, I mean, populations have struggled to produce birds. And when you're not producing as many birds, then your populations are going to decline. And that's what we've seen across the South and other parts of the Midwest and beyond, actually. In Georgia, interestingly enough, if you go back and look, except for COVID year, harvest has been trending downward pretty consistently. Maybe not from one year to the next, but when you look across, 5, 10 years, 15 years, harvest has trended downward. And the last 2 years, harvest has stabilized, and the declines have not persisted in harvest, which is good. Part of that is by design, because the state made a regulations change to try to slow harvest down a little bit 2 years ago. This would be our 3rd spring in that. And so some of that's by design, that they wanted to try to slow down harvest a little bit and try to stabilize it. I'll be curious to see if it starts to increase, which I hope it does, because that would indicate that maybe we've gone as low as we're going, and we hopefully would head out of that, but we shall see. Only time will tell.
As a follow-up question I have, just kind of thinking about, I've thought about this before with turkey hunters, and I get it. Like, a lot of hunters want to do all 49 states you can harvest them in or whatever, kind of thing. But you see it more so with turkey hunting than any other type of hunting, like the traveling throughout the season, where like you'll see the people that are like avid turkey hunters, they might kill 1 or 2 turkeys in 5, 6, 7 states. I mean, has there been any, like with federal duck stamp, or federal duck regulations, which I understand they're migratory and that's why they're federal, but like, there's these possession limits and things like that. Has there been any thought, whether from a federal thing or just a cooperative between states, on just per species, like kind of limiting how many turkeys can be harvested by one hunter regardless of the state? Or What are your
I
thoughts on
honestly
that?
don't. Yeah, I honestly don't know. I don't know if those conversations have been had. I would doubt it, given the fact that management of turkeys falls under the auspice of individual states.
Mm-hmm.
So as long as a hunter is following the game laws within his or her state, then I wouldn't think there would be discussion, beyond that with
Mm-hmm.
other states. Yeah, I mean, certainly the turkey hunting culture has changed. I mean, there's, I was listening to a friend of mine on a podcast today talking about the fact that 15 years ago, he's an outfitter in Florida, and 15 years ago, he struggled to fill 10 slots for out of state hunters, and now
Wow.
he caps at 50, and he turns people away every year.
Goodness.
And so you kind of think about that, and he was discussing the fact that almost all of his hunters are out of state hunters, and so of 50 guys, gals that show up, 48 of them are traveling hunters, and so it does speak to kind of the complexities and how things have changed, because I can remember 20 years ago the thought of going out of state to hunt turkeys was something I never even considered, and now I travel. I'm one of these guys. I travel every year, and I go to different states, and I'm a little weird, I guess. I tend to go back to some of the same places every year because I have places that I really enjoy visiting, and I like the people, or I have friends that I've made in these places, and so I tend to kind of go back. But I'm as guilty as well. As I try to go visit a new state every year, and and I'm not trying to make excuses. In my case, in some ways, I feel like I need to go and see places that turkeys live, because when I'm asked questions or when I have conversations with people, if I've never experienced turkeys in Wyoming or Vermont or New York, or if I've never even seen the place, then it's hard for me to provide an educated response to people, and so I enjoy going to new places every year and understanding what the birds are doing, and meet people and talk to people that have perspective that's totally different from mine. And in a lot of cases, they don't know anything about me. They don't know what I do, and they don't care. And that's great. They just want to talk about turkeys and their experiences. And so that's cool to me. But yeah, you're definitely seeing a different world now when it comes to turkey hunting and traveling hunter.
Yeah. And, one thing that I've learned to enjoy more, and I guess, the waterfowl hunting has turned me on to this more, but I can imagine it's the exact same thing with a turkey. It's, what's really cool about hunting different parts of the country is learning how they do it. That local knowledge, understanding that group of turkeys that they hunt, and how they react. And I just love that about whatever species I hunt somewhere, is learning how this person does it, and sometimes it's just a difference of 100 miles up a river, you know what I mean? Or whatever it is, that population, how they respond, or whatever it is. And, when you're sitting there saying, I tend to go back to the same places, we tend to do the same thing. I mean, we do, because outside of the fun of going after that animal, it's the culture, right? It's the culture, right. It's the people. Those are the things that we always remember, are those, when you, like Ramsey Russell said, you don't really get to know somebody until you put your feet under their table,
Yep,
and,
yep.
I've always loved that part of it. This is a question that hit me that, and this is just based on my limited knowledge, but people that I know that have private land in different parts of the country that have a very sustainable turkey population are very good at predator management. What does maybe you don't know the answer to this question, but what does predator management look like from the harvesting levels that well, I don't even know if we can predict it, that people in Georgia actually go out and do predator hunting and I'm talking specifically to public land.
I have no idea. I mean,
Yeah.
the state has, there's opportunities for folks to go and participate in predator, hunting or whatever on public lands, but I don't honestly have any idea what the harvest is or isn't. I don't
got
know.
you. Yeah, I know. I've seen how important it is. And so, I just wondered if y'all have ever done a study of understanding that, hey, the reason why this population in this specific area is low is because the predators are super high, or that kind of thing. Have you guys looked at any of that before?
I mean, we've obviously studied. We constantly are evaluating predation rates on both, nest and adults. I mean, that's something we track constantly on every study site.
Mm-hmm.
I don't do a lot of work with, hey, let's go manage predators and then figure out what the response is.
I got you. Sure.
And a lot of that is because, a lot of my work is on public lands. And so, state agencies, they fund research. They want the research on their lands. So of course we study birds on private lands, but we to your question, we actually, myself and a number of other researchers are contemplating and have proposed a multi-state study where we would go on the properties and do predator management and then kind of randomly select properties to do that or not and evaluate turkey response and just kind of see, based on how intense the management is, what response do you get? And but we haven't nailed that down, although we're heading in the right direction to get the funding for it. What
a cool thing to do it multi-state like that. I mean, not just, because that's where you get a true sample, right? I mean, it's in numbers, and to be able to do it in different environments, different turkeys in different environments, is going to give you a lot more truer results than just say one specific spot in Georgia,
Yeah, no, and most of my work is, we're replicating across multiple study sites in multiple states.
Gotcha. One thing I'm curious about, this is, I grew up in northwestern Illinois and used to the big hardwood, big leaf, oak tree type of stuff environment. When I came down to the South, the whole pine tree thing, longleaf pines, the forest companies and all this stuff just blew my mind because I'd never been in, like, we had a lease of 250 acres and the whole thing was pine rows. What if anything, do you see that as like, I know that controlled burns are very important. I want to talk about that specifically here in a minute, but when it comes to the harvesting of these trees and the reproduction of the trees, do you guys see that as creating a better habitat for turkeys? Because everything from birds to bees to everything gets affected by that. Or do you see it not be such a positive impact, or it doesn't even matter?
Well, I mean, if you're taking, at least here in the Southeast, a common scenario you see is taking hardwood dominated forest or mixed pine and hardwood forest, logging them and then converting them to pine forest.
Mm-hmm.
That's a problem because what that does is result in a broad scale loss of hardwood forest, which has been well documented. And that's a problem for turkeys because they're linked to hardwood forest during the fall, winter, and even into the summer. We see a lot of brooding activity in hardwoods. So yeah, I mean, that's an issue. It's an issue that's not going away because you're going to continue to see the harvest of hardwood forest. And typically, those forests are going to be converted to something else. They're not going to be regenerated into hardwoods. And if they are, you're talking decades and decades before they will be providing the same benefit to turkeys that they were before they were cut. So yeah, the conversion of hardwood forest to other land uses is certainly a problem.
Yeah, no doubt. I mean, I never really realized it until we had a hunting lease in South Georgia. We used to live in Jacksonville, Florida, and we'd drive up to South Georgia to deer hunt on this, one of those timber type companies leasing out land. And what we noticed is, during the first part of the season, and I didn't really, in Georgia, you can obviously put corn out for deer and stuff like that. And at the beginning of the season, we were successful shooting deer and things like that off that property. But as the season went along, and there was not the same amount of like green source around on the property, because I mean, you're talking planted pine rows and a lot of that's choked out or whatever, and we just noticed the deer traffic on the property completely fell off as the fall went longer. And the only thing I could think to attribute to that is, to your point, like same thing with turkeys, like those areas just are so, from a diversity of nutrients and plant life and all that stuff, they're stripped of that compared to how they were.
Yeah. There's no question.
Mm-hmm. When it comes to the whole burning topic, obviously you see that a lot, and I feel like maybe that's a good thing that social media has done. I don't know, in terms of just spreading awareness for things like that on private property, but it seems like states do a pretty good job, at least on the WMAs I've been around. Like I'll see, a whole side of a WMA get burned. Do you feel like states do a pretty good job of, from what you've seen, Mike, on implementing things like that?
Yes and no. I mean, you see good examples of properties that are well managed and have appropriate fire regimes for turkeys and other species, which would tend to be smaller scale fires that are conducted at outside of the nesting season, or if they are occurring in the nesting season, it's pretty small scale fires. But of course, you can see examples that don't follow that trend, where you have larger scale fires, and we've shown with our work that large scale fires that are consuming a few thousand acres a day are problematic for turkeys. So it really just depends. I mean, I see great examples and I see not so great examples.
I gotcha. And do you feel like, from just outside looking in, I mean, the whole fire topic, the whole goal of that, right, is to basically, you're getting rid of all of this dead stuff so that you're getting all this new foliage to grow, and it's going to attract the insects, and then by default the turkeys.
Yeah, I mean, basically what you're doing is you're setting back succession. You're stimulating the plant community. You're removing needle cast and dead plant material, and creating a situation where you're stimulating the plants to recover, to put a lot of nutrition into their stems, to grow, and that's positive for turkeys and a number of other species as well. So yeah,
right on. One thing, just kind of to close the loop, I guess, on habitat, predation, and all that kind of stuff is, I was just curious. I've always heard that the fire ants have had such an impact on quail in Georgia. Do you guys see that as a problem? Is that problematic for turkeys in nesting?
No, we haven't. No. We haven't seen any issues with that. No.
Okay. All right. And the other thing I wanted to know is, and this might be a tough question to answer, is you've been doing this for a long time, Mike, and what do you, for you, when you look back at your career, you got 32 years, I think, or something like that. What are you most proud of?
Oh gosh. I think the people
professionally, I guess I should say. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I think the people that have worked with me, the graduate students that I've mentored, and the the people that have come out of my lab and gone on to positively impact the bird, and and kind of take what they learned and what they've experienced working with me, and then moving it forward. I think that's by far the most rewarding part of the job.
Passing it on. Yeah. No, I that's so relatable as just the way I look at hunting. Is that I've gotten, I don't know, 8-10 of Tristan's friends involved in the outdoors. At some point, and you just get that point where that's the most important, is that you're passing it on, and somebody can take this knowledge that you've learned and hopefully bring their skill set to help them be even better than you were.
Yeah, for sure. Absolutely.
Well, Mike, we really appreciate your time. We want to be respectful of it, of course, and we just really appreciate you coming on the podcast tonight and just dropping some great info and all that good stuff. And for people that just aren't familiar with your work, where can they find you guys and keep up with all the interesting stuff you're doing?
Yeah, so if you're interested in anything that I've done, you can go to wildturkeylab.com. It's a website that's kind of a clearinghouse of all my social media posts, all the research articles I've published with very lay summaries of what we did, what we found, and why you should care. All the podcasts, or most of the podcasts that I've done, are archived there. If you are on social media, if you're on Facebook, you can just type in my name. But if you're on Instagram or X, you just type in @WildTurkeyDoc, Wild Turkey DOC, and you'll find me. If you're interested in the Wild Turkey DNA work we're doing, you can just go to Wild Turkey DNA on any of the social media accounts, and you'll find those pages, and just follow along. And if you send messages or have questions, you can send messages, and we'll get back to you. Awesome stuff. Well, we can't thank you enough. We had a great time. No, and if hopefully you had a good experience with us on the podcast, and we would love to have you back on again. I mean, super appreciate your time. Thank you. Absolutely. Be glad to do that. Yes, sir. Thank you. All righty. Have a good one, Mike. Yep. Take care.
I've been southbound, I've been hellbound, riding on the midnight train. Going too fast now, think I'll slow down, standing in the pouring rain.